I had Corey in my classroom when I taught 4th grade at William Tell Elementary, and he's a junior now. From the very beginning, we had struggles with him. He didn't show up a lot of the time. When he did show up, he never had his homework completed. During the course of a day, he did everything but focus on his academics. He, bothered his neighbors. He always kind of did the opposite of whatever it was that we were doing.
At the beginning of the school year, 4th grade, I didn't really like coming to school. I didn't like school, so I would fake that I was sick like every day. I think that went on for about a week, and then I would fake that I was sick so I'd go home and I didn't have to go to school. But then the principal caught on to what I was doing.
As a teacher, I had an agenda. I had things that I needed to teach these kids, and I found myself feeling really frustrated with him from the very beginning. And I hate to say this, but he had a track record, oh yeah, this is Corey, he has behavior problems, he doesn't pay attention. And so, in the classroom, I was pretty driven with my own agenda, which was to educate children, and all of them. It didn't matter who they were. I needed to get a set of skills, working with him, get a set of skills that he could use to become successful. And so I just remember becoming really agitated with what I considered to be laziness, his lack of care and concern for school. But what began to develop is a whole different story, and I'm really thankful that I didn't miss out on this story, because one of the things that I've learned early on is that you have to create kind of this environment where kids feel really safe to take risk, and that they allow themselves to be seen, both their weaknesses and their strengths. And so part of my everyday routine was about a 20-minute time period after lunch where I taught the kids how to meditate. All the kids sat in a circle and they went around the room, and they had to share either a compliment, someone who had helped them in the class or something that they had appreciated, a gratitude, something they were thankful for in their life, or a struggle that they were currently having. And it's through that circle time that we had after lunch that this new story with Corey began to develop.
So life at home was pretty difficult, I guess. It was me, my brother, and my mom living at home, and we lived in the trailer court, and my mom, she didn't have a job at the time, I don't think so. And my brother, he worked at a pizza place, and he's been working there for a while. And I think he was mainly paying the bills and all the other things. My mom didn't have a job, and she had a drinking problem.
We quickly found out that Corey was living with an alcoholic mother who I think maybe struggled from several kinds of addiction. They lived in the trailer court. There was no money.
4th grade is when it started going downhill a little bit. She got caught drinking and driving and had to spend the night in jail. And then she actually got caught again, and then the second time it was worse, and she had to go to rehab for a few months. And then when she came back, she was on house arrest and all that. And then her health was also declining. She was in and out of the hospital.
He definitely came to school each day, kind of a disheveled mess, so to speak. So it was kind of through that time that slowly but surely Corey started to tell us about a lot of the struggles that he was having. And Mom had got thrown in jail for drinking and driving and then sent to rehab, and there was really no dad in the picture.
He had visitation rights, but I never really saw him except 2 times when I was living with my mom, or just a few times. And he never really came and visited us.
And not only did I, but the rest of my 27 students in the class, they were feeling frustrated with him. They didn't understand who this kid was that was constantly in trouble and not doing his work and not paying attention and causing chaos in the class. And so once they began to hear his story, it's like everything in the classroom shifted. My agenda was to teach these academic standards and to make sure that every kid learned math and reading and science. And while that's very important, I think that there's something way more important that I needed to be teaching in that classroom. And that was, how do we get everyone to feel a sense of belonging and value and worthiness? because he had none of that. He had very low self-esteem. He didn't feel very loved at times in his life. He had no support at home. He couldn't do his homework. There was no one there to help him.
We didn't have a lot of money, so I mean, my clothes weren't the best, obviously, and my mom did smoke, so I smelled like smoke 24/7, and like most of the kids didn't really like that, and I didn't really have many friends because I smelled like smoke and I didn't look the best.
Everyone in the class, including me, began to shift our focus on what can we do to help, because we care about him and we see him in a way that we hadn't seen him before.
In 4th grade, I also had ADHD really bad, and I would never stay in my seat. I would barely do the work and everything like that. So people found that out, and they came and like sat down with me one day and started to help me with my homework and help me with like just things I needed. Like I would always forget like things at school that I needed for homework, and they would just help me and make sure that I had everything that I needed.
I began to look deeper into whatever his behavior issues were. I began to search for why is this happening, and what supports do I need to put in place to help him. And then the kids stepped up to the plate. Like a couple of boys said, hey, we will be his homework helpers. There were 2 girls who were his so-called agenda helpers, which meant at the end of the day, they would meet with him and make sure that he had all the assignments written in his agenda. And so like for the first time, you know, because he told me, he said, I've just never had friends, Mrs. Strobel. And for the first time ever, he felt like he had friends and people who would be there for him.
Miss Strobel, she seemed like she really cared about me and cared about what my home life was and how I felt. And so I talked to her a lot, and also I had my grandma, and sometimes I had my brother, but he was mainly working all the time, so I didn't really get to talk to him much about it. But if I ever needed something, I usually went to Miss Strobel because I saw her most of the time, every day. So I went to her and she helped me out a lot.
Teaching Corey completely changed the way that I teach students. And so I think when I look back that I was really maybe a student and Corey was my teacher, because I was kind of quick to judge and I had my own agenda, you know, of what needed to be accomplished in a day.
I think we were in a group. We used to do circles, and we used to like share one thing that like happened that week or something. And I shared something, and I think it it got to her. So she came up and talked to me one day about it and asked me what my home life was like and what everything was happening, or how everything was happening at home. And she just seemed like she cared a lot and cared about what was happening and wanted to help me. And ever since that day, I started to like to come to school. So we were doing an assignment, and I think it was a writing assignment. So I wrote about how she made me want to come to school and want to participate in class because I felt like I was like safe or wanted in that class, I guess.
I knew the importance of fostering relationships with my students. You know, I always greeted them in the hallway when they came in. I always hugged or high-fived them when they left. I did certain things to try to make it an environment where they really got to know who I was as a person so that I could connect with them on that emotional level. Because as I've said before, you know, you're just not going to teach them anything academic until you teach that, you know, you touch that emotional system, and then they open themselves up a little bit. And so what he really did for me was he helped me like really understand the importance of me saying, you know what, it's okay. I'm putting these academics aside for 20 minutes a day, even though maybe I'm not supposed to. And I'm going to work on teaching these kids how to have relationships with one another, how to be kind with one another, how to be compassionate, how to be understanding. And I'm also teaching myself those things because Corey's teaching me how to do that. And so I feel like after I taught Corey that I started to look through the lens of education very differently. And I began to see that I am much more than a teacher of math and a teacher of reading and science and social studies. That when I look back and see, why did I go into this profession? I went into this profession because I wanted to impact students. I wanted to build their self-esteem. I wanted to teach them that they had unlimited potential and that at the end of the day, no matter what had happened, they were still worth it. And so all these things that I'm talking about, you can't tie that to a content area. You can't tie that to an academic course. These are real life skills that we want kids to take when they leave our classroom. I believe those kids learned how to have relationships with one another. I believe that they learned that not every child goes home to the exact same type of home that they do. So maybe then rather quickly judging someone, they needed to get to understand him and help him feel like he was a valued member of our classroom. And so he was a game changer for me, Corey was. So I had this anxiety about letting him go because Corey, I could tell that, they say, oh, you want your classroom to feel like a family. Ours really did that year. Like Corey, that was Corey's family. He could depend on everyone in that class. He could depend on me to support him. And so I thought, what happens to him when he leaves here May 27th?
I was scared that I wasn't going to have a nice teacher like her, but when I got there, it was a guy teacher, and it was my first guy teacher, so I was kind of nervous, but he was actually he was the same as her. He was really ecstatic about teaching and learning about his students.
Corey went to 5th grade, obviously, and that was a really tough year for him as well. And he had Mr. Johnson, who also has that same demeanor. He really embraces kids and has relationships with them and knows kind of how to do that.
In the summer of 5th grade, I just went to my aunt's to visit. She lives in Tennessee, so I went there for I think a month or two to visit. When I came back from with my aunt, the day of, I was told I was going to Sean's house. He was he met my mom when I was 2 years old, and he raised me ever since, and I thought of him as a father, and just he was there too for me. And so I went to his house and stayed for the rest of the summer there. He had a really big impact in my life and meant a lot to me, and him and my mom had complications and broke up, and I would still see him every weekend, and he would still want to see me and see how I was doing and everything like that. So he had a big impact on me. I think it was because my mom was so sick is why I went to Sean's house in the first place, because it was literally the day I came back was the day I left. So I didn't really, I think she knew she was getting sick, and she didn't want me to be around and feel pain and stuff like that. So she wanted me to be away. His son also lived at the house, so I was close to him too, and we used to play games, and I'll play football and stuff together, and everything like that. And one day Sean came downstairs and was crying, and I didn't know what was going on. I honestly thought my mom had went back to jail or something like that. I wasn't really for sure, but then he looked at me and I looked at him, and he said that Mom had passed away, and everything fell apart there, and I didn't know what to do.
I got a phone call. His mother had passed away. Now, I knew that his mom was all he had. He had a couple of brothers, but I think they were busy and had jobs, and one maybe lived in Jasper. So his mom had passed away. So I went to the funeral home, and I saw him there, and he was just crushed. I mean, I just think how many more challenges does this particular, child have to go through?
After the funeral and everything, I was asked where I wanted to live. I had the choice of my grandma's, at Sean's house, or my dad's house. And I ended up choosing my dad's house because I didn't really know my dad, and I actually wanted to get to know him since my mom had passed away. So that was the only family I guess I'd had biological. So I wanted to live there because of that, and then because my middle brother, I didn't live with him for quite a while, and I missed him, so I moved there because of that reason. And when I moved there, I didn't really know anything about him, so I just was going along with the flow, and I found out that he also had a pretty bad alcohol addiction, and I think he was into some drugs and some things. So it was better than my past, where I was living, but it was still had the same qualities of what it was. And we lived in an apartment, and the school was a lot better. I really enjoyed going to school because I met some friends, and that helped brighten everything. But it was still hard going to a new school and going or having to live with your mother passing away and everything. It was pretty difficult. It was pretty rough, and he was constantly drinking, and he worked a lot, and so it was just me and my brother usually there. And my brother worked too, and it was pretty rough. And one day my brother and my dad always argued, and they didn't see eye to eye on really anything. So one day my brother and him got in an argument, and my brother ended up just moving out, and I couldn't move out at the time because I was only, I think, 14 or 13, so I didn't have the right to move out. And when my brother moved out, it got a lot harder because he would just argue with me, and we'd always have fights about every little thing possible, and he just took everything out on me, really. And he would have girlfriends, and he would treat their kids like way better than what he would treat me. Like, he would buy them TVs and toys and all this other, like, Xboxes and stuff like this, and he would just buy me just some things that I needed just to get by. And I mean, I think he cared, but I don't really think he knew how to be a dad because he didn't really have us kids.
And so shortly after that, I learned that Corey was going to Jasper to live with his dad, a dad that he never really knew much about. But I guess that was the best option for him, or the only option. And so, interestingly enough, I kept up with Corey, and then I became the curriculum director at Jasper Schools, which meant that I could really be visible and keep an eye on him, both his personal life and his academics. And so I would go to the middle school or high school and seek him out every now and then and just have hallway conversations with him, ask him how it's going. And then I actually had conversations with his teachers along the way. I don't think that he knew that, but I needed to know if the light that I saw come on in Corey, academic-wise. See, things began to change academic-wise for him in my classroom because he was a non-reader. He struggled in every area of academics, but I think that he just didn't have that belief in himself, and he never had anyone to help him. And so I really felt like when he left fourth grade that he was also performing so much better in school, and he actually had that kind of that itch, that yearning to learn. And so I was so excited to find out, his teacher was yeah, sometimes it's hard for him, but he's doing really well. And, he's got a B in reading, or, he turns in all his homework. He tries really hard for me. And I'm thinking, man, this kid is making it happen. He is somehow continuing to push himself further. And so, being the curriculum director, I have to admit that, I had the access to go in and check on his grades and see if he was doing his homework. And I did that periodically. But I was able to stay in touch with him even up until last year when I left as curriculum director. One of the last things I did was meet with some people at the high school to ensure that, Corey was on the right track. And I had heard right before I left Jasper, I had heard that Corey was going to live with another family, that things had gotten really bad with his dad.
I met Angie. My best friend, he dated her daughter. So I tried to be away at the house as much as I could, as much as he would let me. So I would use every weekend at her house, because me and my friend would always go over there, and we would just hang out and have fun.
We lived across from a park, and he was on the other side of the park, and he would come over and play basketball and stuff with his friends, and he'd always make it a point to come over to the house to pop in just to say hi. And I'd always tell my husband, gosh, he's such a sweet kid. And that's kind of how it all started. One
day I got to talking with Angie and started telling her my past and everything, and it got to her, and she connected with me emotionally. So I spent a lot of time over there, and she knew that my life at home was pretty bad. So she asked if I ever needed a place to stay, then I could come live with them, because she knew how bad it was at home. And so one day me and my dad got in the biggest argument we've ever got in. It was pushing and shoving and everything like that. And we were cursing, and it was just terrible. And the fight was about me not moving with him and his girlfriend to Du Bois, and I would have to change schools, and I'd have to do all this other stuff, basically restart again after. And it was my sophomore year, so it would have been tough losing all my friends and trying to restart just in 2 years. And so I told him that I was going to move over to Angie's house because she had offered me a home, and he wasn't really happy about that at all because he just didn't really like Angie because he thought that she was trying to take me away from him, I guess. I'm not sure. The day after we got in that big argument, me and her went to my house and we packed up all my things and moved it over to her house. And after that day, I saw my dad once or twice, and then that was it. And then now it's been, I think, 2 to 3 years, and I haven't seen my dad at all or talked to him. The only time I've seen him at like Walmart or things like that, and I wave and he doesn't really wave back or anything. He just walks away.
He was just such a good kid, and I said I just couldn't imagine all these struggles that he's had. And I always said, well, if something ever happens, maybe you could live with us. And him and his dad had gotten into it one day, and he knew Corey didn't really want to be there. And he just told me if we wanted him, we could have him, and we went and had it legalized then.
It was a lot better. The atmosphere and everything was just, she had 2 kids. One was in my age, and it was the daughter, and one above my age. So it was like I had brothers and sisters, because mine were older and out of the house and living on their own. So that helped out a lot. And I didn't really, after I moved out of my dad's house, I stopped looking back at the past and I started looking towards the future. And I didn't want to dwell on the past because I wouldn't get anywhere in the future with that. So I haven't really looked back at what all I've come through, I guess, and it's helped me more than anything to look at the future more than the past.
There's these labels that get put on kids from early on. It's amazing to me that at grade 1, we've already labeled kids. We've labeled them as smart, not smart, poor, rich, at first grade. And what I have found is those darn labels, they follow a kid unless you're the one that decides that regardless of this particular child's track record, which Corey had a track record, he was known as being uninterested in his academics, behavior problems, not paying attention, causing problems in the classroom. And I just think, do any of us want to be, do I want my choices and my decisions of the past that were wrong or bad to follow me through life? Do I not want to wake up every single day with a new chance to do better? And so I think when those kids walk into your classroom, you might get nervous when you see some of the names on the class list, because you do know that certain ones, let's be honest, certain ones are a lot more challenging to teach. You have to put that to the side and say, I am going to get to know this child, and then I will make my decisions based on this child. And then you have to understand and realize that just because they show up with this so-called baggage, isn't that what you signed up for? But to be honest, when we look back at that and we say, why did we choose this profession? I don't think any of us I don't think any of us chose it because of the big paycheck. It's just not one of those professions that you choose because you're going to work those hours of 8 to 3 and you're going to collect that big paycheck. If you go way back to remembering why you went into education, most people can tell you why they went into it. They went into it because they felt like they could impact children. They felt very influential, and they felt like they could encourage children. They felt like what they had to offer would help children have a better life. I mean, you go into this profession because you do really love children. You really do love children or young adults, and you believe that you have the skill set to help them attain the skills that they need to be successful in life. And so I don't think that there's any other profession that is as important as teaching Yet I will tell you, it's one of the most challenging endeavors right now out there.
And if they get to know you on a personal level and find out what your home life's about, and they see that, they try harder at with like not being a teacher, but being more of someone to talk to and to be a role model and inspire you to do more and give you little speeches that just make you want to do great in life and be something when you grow up.
When I see the impact that I had on Corey's life and the impact that he had on mine, I just think that's why I chose this profession, right? I mean, that's why I'm in this, to change kids' lives. And so I think that as teachers, we can get really caught up in the politics and a lot of negative impacts that are taking place right now, and that what we really need to do is we need to remember why we chose this profession. And then we need to step into that classroom 180 days a year and know that for 7 hours a day, we have the opportunity to love those kids, to believe in those kids, and to build their self-esteem. I think that's what it's about. This kid has had so many challenges in his life, yet every time I saw him in the hallway at Jasper, he had never, ever lost that light in his eyes. Like, he just has this goodness that comes from him, regardless of the challenges and the struggles that he's had. This kid continues to show up for life. I continue to watch him walk this path in life, and it continues to inspire me, both as a person on a personal level, but also as an educator. Because I don't know that we realize that what we do in those classrooms can have major payoffs later in life. I was one piece of that. He was a big piece of it for my life.